This video is going to go through the example of both parts A and parts B. I recommend you pause the video now and try part A, and then come back to the video and see how you did. Okay, so assuming you paused and tried it, here we want to get in standard form, subtract 5 from both sides, and you will get 12x squared minus 4x minus 5 is equal to 0. Step 2 is just make sure you have the quadratic formula written handy. And now we're going to plug in the values and simplify. So our A, our B, our C. A is 12, B is negative 4, C is negative 5. So the opposite of B is positive 4. B squared is 16. 4 times 12 times negative 5 is negative 240. Do not forget the negative. That's a common mistake that students make. And then 2a, be careful here. 2 times negative, don't do 2c. 2a, 2 times 12 is 24. Okay, so now, plugging in, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. So minus a negative 240 all over 24. So now, for a couple of steps, I'm going to simplify the square root. 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 240, because minus a negative is plus, all over 24. X equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 256, that is 16 plus 240, all over 24. Now, on this day, our square roots will simplify to a, 256 is a perfect square, so the square root will simplify to an integer. So this becomes x is equal to 4 plus or minus 16 all over 24. And now we're going to consider both cases. X is equal to 4 minus 16 over 24, or, I miss doing that with you guys, x is equal to 4 plus 16 all over 24. 4 minus 16 is negative 12 over 24, and that simplifies because 12 goes into both of these. So that simplifies to x is equal to negative a half, or 4 plus 16 is 20 over 24. 4 goes into both of those, so or x is equal to 5 over 6. And that is the answer to A. A quick comment here, although I will not fully solve it, is you'll notice the answers here are just fractions, which is going to happen with each of the problems today. Up here, you could have solved this by factoring. Factoring was an option. I would not have used completing the square because A was not 1. I would not have used square roots because it has a bx term, but it does factor. Here's the thing though. I don't think it factors easily, because on the top I would do negative 5 times 12, which is negative 60 over negative 4. And I'm not immediately seeing how to factor that, so I would not have factored. But it does factor, and you can solve it by factoring. Okay, so now in the video, problem B, you should pause it and try to solve problem B. There's a little bit of a trick on this one, but pause it and then come back. Okay, we are back. So I'm not going to fill out the steps, except I may write the quadratic formula in step 2. But step 1 is to get it in standard form, so I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, so next, quadratic formula is x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm going to fill out the right-hand table, not the left-hand table though. Opposite of b here is a positive 4. b squared is 16. 4ac, that's 4 times 4 times 1 is 16. 2 times 4 is 8. So plugging in, I get x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 16. All over 2a is 8. So now I'm going to simplify what's under the square root a bit, and I'm going to get 4 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 8. Now here's the slight little trickiness to it. The square root of 0 is just 0. So typically, just next, you would write x is equal to 4 over 8, or x is equal to 1/2. And if you looked at this graphed, so if I go into a graphing calculator and I plug this in, 4x squared minus 4x plus 1, what you're going to see is you are going to see a quadratic has a y-intercept of 1, and so if we do this as 1, that is 1. The x-intercept is 1/2. But what happens is it sits on the x-axis. So both of its roots, because generally it has 2 roots, both of its roots are at 1/2. So if let me just make sure I've turned off all my stats plotting. And if I go to zoom standard, you're going to see a quadratic that just sits right on the x-axis at x is equal to 1/2. So that's kind of neat. Now here the extension, can you think of another way to solve this quadratic? You could solve by graphing. Or you may have noticed here, 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. 4x squared is 2x quantity squared. 1 is 1 squared. And the middle term is 2 times 2x times 1. So this actually factors as 2x minus 1 quantity squared equals 0. And now you could solve this using square roots, because this was a perfect square trinomial. So that takes us through both of these examples.